Welcome to the Quest podcast. I'm Brandon Robertson. The writer Lao Tzu once said, "A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving." That's been my experience as I've traversed the vast terrains of spirituality in my own life. I've discovered that the more questions I ask and the more places I wander, the less I know, but the more I get the chance to stand in wide-eyed wonder at the bigness of this world. On this podcast, I'll bring you conversations with folks from around the world who inspire me and fan my own flame to go deeper on this journey of spirituality. And I hope that as you listen, you're challenged to rethink the way that you view the world, that you're inspired, and that you walk away with that same wonder that I get from having these conversations. So I'm really excited and honored that you've joined me today. Let's listen in to today's conversation. Welcome back to the Quest podcast. You know, in this strange and anxiety-inducing season of human history, as we as humanity fight this global pandemic, lots of us in the religious world are thinking about what this moment means for the future of organized religion and spirituality in general. As a pastor of a congregation in San Diego, I know I'm thinking about what it means to continue the digital ministry we've started in this season and to retain the people that have started attending our church virtually from around the world. And we're also asking some theological questions about what it means, for instance, to receive communion virtually. Though our tradition is fairly relaxed on some of these traditional, liturgical, theological questions, there are sections of the Christian church around the world that are really wrestling with what it means to be a church online. Today I have a conversation with a friend and someone I really admire as a deep thinker, as a historian, and as an incredible writer. Her name is Dr. Diana Butler Bass. And I sat down with this conversation today with the intention of talking a little bit about her books Grateful and Grounded, two of her recent books, and talking about how that applies to us in COVID-19. But very quickly, as we began to pick her historical brain, we got into a conversation about history and how the church has evolved and what she's seeing as the future, as well as some of those bigger theological questions that traditions like the Episcopal Church and the Roman Catholic Church are wrestling with. This conversation is super compelling. It is inspiring and encouraging, and I really think you'll benefit from engaging with it today. So without further ado, I'm really excited to present to you my conversation with Dr. Diana Butler Bass. Dr. Diana Butler Bass, it's so good to see you and be able to virtually connect with you today. The first thing that I wanted to just ask is, how in the world are you doing in this time of COVID-19, and what is life like for you right now?
Well, life is a little weird, as it is for all of us. Last year, I had taken quite a few months off to write a new book that's coming out sometime next year, whenever publishers go back to work. So, I mean, what you know about me is true, is that I'm really an extrovert, and I love preaching and teaching and being with people in public and meeting lots of new people. So I was really kind of at my wit's end of intro by January this year. And so I looked at my calendar and I was very excited because I had all of Lent filled with speaking engagements. And then I had planned the very first ever event that I invited people to, a retreat for about 150 women in Florida. And I was so excited about that. And so I went on 2 events, and then all this happened. And so now I'm back in my office, terrified of introversion and having no extroverted gas tank filled during any part of the last 6 to 8 months. So frankly, the truth of it is I'm lonely. I love my family. They're great. I love my dog, but I miss my work very much, my public work.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like a lot of us, even me, I've been saying, I mean, I'm an introvert, and so I've been faring okay, and yet I agree, just being able to get out and be with people, and also for those of us who travel a good bit, like changing that pace of life is difficult to do, and it does feel like thinking that I'll be on the ground maybe for the next 6 months drives me crazy.
Yeah, I traveled more than 100,000 miles a year for the last 10 years, and was well up into some, you know, a couple 100,000 points over 1 million miles on United. And so I'm very used. I mean, I know people who work at the airports. I know flight attendants, and I actually kind of loved all that. And you know, people like to complain about it, but I always treated the airport a little bit like it was this kind of flowing place of life where you could have unexpected conversations. I met some of the most amazing people in airports and lounges and sitting next to them on airplanes. And so I miss all that. There was a couple weeks ago, I put up a tweet and I said, I never thought I'd really miss United Airlines. And almost immediately they tweeted back to me. They said, "We miss you more."
I bet that's true. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And so I'm sure I'm just one more number in a bunch of kind of high level frequent flyers they have. But it was kind of funny when they got back just so quickly and says you more. And that's kind of the way with a lot of my life right now. Restaurants where my family love to go, places, friends, small businesses where I love to shop. It's just all this stuff is just so difficult. I haven't said anything about church, but that's where I would always do my work, in churches and teaching in sanctuaries and teaching in church basements.
Totally.
All that's not happening. But we're well. I'm healthy. My family is well. Here in Northern Virginia, we just went over 10,000 cases statewide. So it hasn't been like New York. But outside of Washington, D.C., here in the suburbs, we've all been really careful since the second week of March, I guess, a little bit before the national news or the national shutdown started happening. We began about a week or 2 days earlier than that. So
totally. Yeah. And have they talked about is reopening on the minds at all in Virginia?
Well, it's interesting. This is a kind of fascinating conversation. I hadn't talked to anybody about this. The governor of Virginia is actually a doctor. And he's the only doctor governor that there is right now. And when he announced the statewide formal shutdown, even though much had informally shut down, he shut us down until June 8th.
Wow.
We're under the longest shutdown in the country. And people have been great about it. I think there was one crazy protest maybe in Richmond, but it was very small. It was not a big deal. And, there are a few things he's starting to open now. We had such a strict shutdown that doctors' offices were not allowed to take non-emergency patients. And all elective surgeries were canceled. I think our shutdown was a lot more like San Francisco's or the big one in California than probably any other place. And so it's been pretty effective. And most people I know, most of my intimate circle of friends here have stayed healthy.
Good.
So it is good, but we're in it still.
Yeah.
Trump says, open up, we're right across the river from Washington, D.C. And we're all looking at each other going, well, our governor's not letting us open anything up, so we don't know.
it's a time to be grateful for states' rights and the ability of governors to resist that.
Really. So anyway, that's kind of where we are, and my neighbors, it's nice to walk around here and talk to them at a distance. One of my neighbors is this elderly African-American woman who lives down the street, and I was walking one day and she was doing kind of like yoga in her garage, and so I said, I just chatted with her from afar, and she's never really liked the current president at all, and so I said something like, "Oh my gosh, isn't this terrible?" And she yells at me, she goes, "I always told you he was going to kill us." And then she went on, she said, "Oh, but I thought he was going to drop a nuclear bomb on us and blow us up." And so
oh my. That's funny and sadly scarily true.
Yeah, and she's kind of a really amazing neighbor. I love talking to her because she says exactly what she thinks all the time, and so it was just kind of wonderful to hear that, because I kind of had thought the same, for the last 3 years, that something terrible would happen, but I always thought it would be a war, or some sort of massive domestic terrorist insurgency, which we might be having now. But I would have never guessed a pandemic. Never.
Totally.
In a million years.
Yeah. In a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago with John Dominic Crossan, he had this great analogy. He said, before this, the United States and China were the great world powers, and COVID-19 has shown us that there's a third, and it is COVID-19, and it has the ability to level even the most powerful nations. And thinking about that and the way that this virus has been able to humanity, for the first time in obviously most of our lives, it feels like a moment, obviously, that's going to shape history, and you as a historian, I'm sure, are thinking, like, how are you thinking about living in a moment that is reshaping what church and religious worship look like, that is reshaping how we function as a society, and probably will change things for at least the next 2, 5, 10 years? How do you process these moments?
Well, I think historically, just naturally, about a lot of things. And so when people say, what's it like to live in this historic moment, I think of all moments as historic. And that somehow the time and the era that we live in, it winds up shaping all kinds of things that we can't imagine. And so, I'm quite taken by like the native vision that you live for 7 generations in the future. And when I was a college professor, one of the things that I used to do at the end of teaching a church history class is I would always ask the students, I want you to think 100 years ahead. And what will the people in 100 years thank you for? And what will the people in 100 years wish you would have done differently? And so that was oftentimes a question that I would put on a final exam or a paper to wrap up a class. So that's just kind of the way that I approach life in general. And it's a perspective. It's really almost a spiritual practice for me, is putting my life in the sort of the longer term of the flow of human time. And so in that sense, this is not all that different. But it has got me thinking, if you were talking to, say, Dom Crossan, it's gotten me thinking a lot about how pandemics and epidemics affected religion in the past. And not just pandemics, but also I've thought quite a bit about the Great Depression and what its impacts were on religious communities, how the Great Depression really reshaped religion in the 20th century. So somehow we're living in the merging of these two great historical realities, this massive health crisis that has become massive economic crisis, which is actually in the process of becoming a massive political crisis. And so all we can do in terms of history is to kind of look back at distinctive aspects of those kinds of crises that appeared in the past and see, well, what might happen, and history can point the way towards what might happen. But the honest truth is what does happen is up to us and how we respond.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's an important word. And I found myself often in this season thinking kind of in that same sense of this is a historic moment. We're living in, something is happening. Obviously, in your writing and others, people have been talking about being on the precipice of a type of revolution. And we were talking about it spiritually. And it occurs to me that this is helping us, in some senses, push forward in a much faster pace than any of us could have imagined. And one of the shifts that we've seen, obviously, is that communities, regardless of their size, big and small, have all been forced to go online if they're faith communities. And the playing field, in some senses, has been leveled, meaning that the Rock Church down the road, who has 20,000 people normally, and Mission Gathering that has 100 people that meet here, we now have equal access in some ways to the global community. And the small church that's made up of elderly folks is now live streaming their services. And it just occurs to me that this is obviously going to change the way we do church forever. And like, there's no option for us not to do online worship and have online small groups. And how are you thinking about this aspect of this moment, and how does it fit in with the vision that you've been articulating for over the course of your career about where you think religion is heading?
I love this question, and I was listening to that interview that I think it was Ali Velshi on MSNBC did with Bill Gates a couple nights ago. And I was fascinated because one of the things Bill Gates said is that this moment has accelerated the adoption of technology. So what it usually would take somewhere between 10 and 15 years to adopt, people have now adopted in 10 weeks. And oh my gosh, when I heard that, I was, all I could think about was the things that you're saying, is that people who never would have imagined themselves online, nice 75, 85-year-old church members who were afraid of email are now, watching Facebook Live or know how to get to Zoom. My husband is a communications director at a very large Methodist church, and the average age there is something like 63 years old. And every single Sunday they have multi-platform worship up, and so they have YouTube, Facebook Live. I do believe they have Zoom capacity in some way or another. I'm not even sure all the platforms they're on. And on Easter Sunday at their church, so it's a big church. So a normal Easter Sunday, they would have gotten about 2,000 people in the building. Well, my husband was watching what was happening online, and on Easter Sunday they had almost, I think his final count was 7,000, something like that. And he said, "Where are all these people coming from?" It's like, who are these people? And they all just decided all of a sudden to tune into Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. What's that all about? And so that is evidence of that level of adapting to this moment technologically. Now, your question's bigger, and it's not just about that, people watching Zoom worship. The ways that I've been thinking about it have to do a lot more with one of the big questions that's emerged around Christian communities and this use of technology. And that is, can you do sacraments online? And what did the disciples do? I'm sure you all just do Zoom Eucharist and stuff like that, don't you?
Yeah.
Right.
We're super low church, so we told our congregation does waffles and wine in the morning and send in pictures, but we do the Eucharist virtually, and they do it with whatever elements they have.
That was what I expected to hear because of the theology that you all have of both the Eucharist and also the priesthood of all believers. It's like, that everyone goes around the table. The table is open to all. So it's not been that much of a problem for disciples or some Methodists, Baptists, Congregationalists, Free Church types, many Presbyterians. They've just kind of moved this all online. But, oh my gosh, probably about 3/4 of the Lutheran churches I know are not celebrating the Lord's Supper. Maybe about 1/3 to 1/2 of Methodist churches. The Episcopal Church, this is an interesting one. They just tried to celebrate online Eucharist. And then the Catholics and the Orthodox are not celebrating online. And so but the deep question is, can this kind of technology carry the presence of God in a deeply transformative way? And for these higher church kinds of denominations, they're all kind of saying that their leaders are, not necessarily their individual clergy or their lay people, but what their leaders are saying is that this technology cannot carry the presence of Christ in the same way that the sacraments would be made real, meaningful, transformative, that they would be the actual presence of Christ in community. And that's problematic.
Yeah.
Isn't it though?
I had never even, obviously, I haven't been thinking too much about those traditions, but that is very strange theology. And yeah, couldn't it be, just theorizing, couldn't it be possible that if I had bread and the priest spoke the words of institution using priesthood authority over the waves? Yeah, I would kind of think that, why would we say Christ's presence wouldn't?
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's what happened with the bishop in the Episcopal Church. Really hard stuff. For reality. I mean, that's what philosophers do for a living, is that they ask questions about what is real and what is a human being and how do we know what we know, and all those kinds of incredible questions of philosophy. And I think historically he thinks philosophically. And so we're friends, and he had told me right after Easter that he was sending out a note to the congregations that are in his care in Louisiana, and he was going to give them permission to do virtual that rival congregation could do the Eucharist, and that congregation could attend with their own, actually a list as well of directions, asking people to bring, bread and wine or crackers and grape juice, or, something that was very much reverent, in line with the tradition. So, don't show up with Cheetos and Diet Coke,
Yeah.
But, this, kind of make it biblical, people, and that the people of God were invited to sit the elements right near, their computers, elements on Zoom. And you would have thought that he had suggested going into the church, ripping down all the crosses and burning the pews. His own diocese, his own people were so happy that this was going to happen. They felt like, they were really looking forward to it. They didn't have to do it. It was just made an option to the congregations that wanted to do it. And, they felt like this displayed an enormous amount of trust, on the part of their bishop towards the people in the diocese. But apparently there was a kind of an internet Twitter crusade that stirred up incredible amount of pressure against him. And there was threats of a heresy trial. And I was stunned. Heresy trial for using Zoom Eucharist? But
in the midst of a pandemic, don't we have better things to be thinking about?
Well, yeah. But, it's really interesting because, I think the whole thing is fascinating. Talk about something that's going to wind up as a quirky little, footnote in somebody's church history book. Yeah. But there's a whole bunch of pieces of this that are kind of troubling. One is this idea that I've seen from a lot of these people. We don't celebrate the Eucharist over television. Now this is, I see you're kind of moving your head in an interesting way. What that is, it shows an incredible misunderstanding of what the internet is.
Yeah.
The reason you all don't do communion, even the disciples of Christ, the lower church denomination, you're not going to do TV Eucharist. You're not going to do TV Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
And it's because their televisions, as we had construed of them up until just fairly recently, were not interactive. Our televisions were a one-way medium in which something was being broadcast to us and we watched it. And so our participation as human beings was in our imaginations, it was in consumption, but there was no connection really between all of the people who were watching the TV. It was just the people sitting in that room with maybe their family watching this story unfold on television. And this actually goes back to a conversation that I had on an airplane about 12 years ago or so. I was sitting next to a Disney executive, and she was telling me, and imagine this is 12 years in the past, she was telling me that in the fairly near future, the Disney Channel would not just be a TV channel where you watched things, but instead that Disney Entertainment would be a fully communal and interactive global storytelling platform where people would form real communities around these different stories that were being told, whether they were films or, Disney Channel shows or sort of special events that Disney would do. And she could literally, she was telling me this, she could literally imagine that the action of Disney almost exclusively took place in these communities that identify themselves around this global storytelling platform, rather than even Disney's specific content, is that they were opening up the possibility of their audience to become co-creators of the reality of Disney. And I remember I just sat and listened to her, because I had never heard anybody say anything like this before. And by the time, she was unfurling this for about an hour on this flight, was from DC to LA. And I just took it all in, because literally she was rocking my technological world. And and there was this one point in the conversation when she said, we imagine being a global storytelling platform in which people, come to us, they hear the stories, but then they make these communities, they take it into their own lives. It changes who they are. No, this is not television, and this is not just going into a theater and watching Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. But I was really getting it. And I said to her, oh my gosh, a global storytelling platform. And she looked at me. I said, I can't think of another global storytelling platform in the entire planet except for the Roman Catholic Church. And she laughed, and she said, oh, but they've given up the job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That was true then, has been true. And as we lean into this moment, I wonder, obviously, my experience has always been that when theology and reality clash, we need to rethink our theology, but that's a fairly progressive perspective. And I wonder how, in this moment, when, as you're saying, we're hitting up against this call. It's not even a call. It's the only way to survive in this moment.
Well, what is the truth about this, of course, is that she understood what this was all about. And I've been, I wrote about this encounter in one of my books, not with quite this level of complexity, but I've certainly taught about it in events with denominations. And people will kind of sit there and go, oh yeah, that's what we have to do. But they didn't really get it. They didn't really get that we had entered. What I felt that day on the airplane, it was like that woman, it was as if we lived 500 years ago. And that woman had said to me, and you know what is going to happen is that pretty soon we're going to be able to print Bibles in English. And the Bibles will be printed not by individual scribes, but they'll come off of this thing called a printing press, and we'll be able to publish 100 of them in a month rather than one in a year. And I got it. I literally got it. It was like, that's what she's talking about. But it's true about the press. That's also true about is that it not only changed the way people did things, that all of a sudden, anyone who could read, and of course literacy increased as the spread of the Bible increased. People wanted to read the Bible, so literacy itself increased. But anyone who could read the Bible. And we all know what happened when that occurred, is that all of a sudden everything that the traditional church did was up for question. And it all had to be reimagined. And I'm a Protestant. I was born Methodist. I've been in an Episcopal church for some 35, 40 years now. Those traditions, your tradition, wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for that. that moment 500 years ago. And it not only changed kind of the mechanisms of how things work, which is what people are thinking about right now. They're just thinking, oh, we're going to do Zoom Eucharist, and as soon as we're done with this, it'll all go back to normal. Yeah. It's like, oh, we're going to teach little children how to read for themselves, and as soon as they know how to read, it'll all go back to normal.
Yeah.
And what people didn't understand then, some people did and were very frightened by reading, but most people didn't understand at the time, is that the technology of the printing press, the technology of reading, the technology of being able to put the Bible in the hands of so many people, that technology was actually going to change the very nature of ways people apprehended God. Mm. And how they met God. Mm. And so, I think it's actually kind of hilarious right now that the Episcopal Church, which has shaped its 500-year history on a book, the Book of Common Prayer, that book was considered to be absolutely revolutionary when it came into being. And it toppled empires, basically. It toppled kings, and it toppled political orders. And so it was, they understood the time when they just, the book itself changed the world, not just the content of it, but the actual reading of at my own church, but other churches as well are saying, oh, this is just a delivery system, and that once we get past this, we're just going to go back to the way it was. And that's not true.
Yeah. And it feels weird, honestly, as a millennial who's grown up always knowing the internet and always being connected to the internet, see this moment as revolutionary as before this, instead of being that involved the internet. And what I do think that, one, of course, more people are being introduced to this technology. So, and you've kind of touched on this, this has made every church a global church. This has made every community of faith. That's what we've been talking about as a staff here. Like, I used to literally, 4 months ago, was kind of making fun of the churches that were investing. There were these churches that had digital pastors. And I was like, what a waste of money. I can do a digital pastor's job in 5 minutes on my phone. But now we're having conversation of, we actually have to, and they become tithing members of our church, and they become engaged in our small groups. They actually will need ministering to. And that's going to cause us to rethink how we do what we do. In some really fundamental ways, even about gathering again, using live stream. I do think and hope that these traditions, and my own tradition, we continue to wake up to see, like you said, this isn't going to go back. We don't have a choice to go back. In fact, what they're saying about COVID, there's different theories, but they're saying this could be a thing that happens yearly for the next few years. So this could become a rhythm of life that we have to embrace. And I stand in awe and in excitement, and also a little bit of fear about what this means for.
The thing changed 500 years ago were not perfect technologies. They opened the door toward new understandings of God and human beings, and happens, how God speaks, how we hear, how we encounter one another, how, I mean, it wasn't a perfect technology. And, even some of the people who originally championed, say, the Bible and the Bible alone, Luther, when they saw the peasants' revolt happen, went, oh, wait, we didn't mean that,
Yeah.
or, it's like, no, the Calvinists aren't allowed to say this, or the Calvinists saying we have to we have to throw the Anabaptists in the river. And so it's like the technology opened up these possibilities in even the people who initially liked them.
Yeah.
Began to see the problems of them. But that's just what human beings, that's just history. That just happens. And so this technology that we're living in, it's not perfect. I would love to be able to hug you, and sit in some little restaurant in San Diego and have fish tacos together, and have it drip down my shirt, and like all those things that are funny and fun and just, make life feel whole in a sense that we human beings love. But, I keep thinking not only about the sort of the technology opening up these new paths so that we're really understanding the global reach that we all have, that we all are in a sense making right now, global storytelling platforms, and that they're multiple, they're not single. Disney's not controlling this one. This one is just growing up organically all over the internet. So we're doing that, which is a pretty exciting work. And I forgot what I was going to say. The second piece, but it'll come back to me. It's like easy.
Totally.
Well, I turned 6 this year, so it does happen once in a while. But it's exciting. To me, it's just exciting because we're going to make mistakes with it. It's not perfect. It's not going to be our dream come true technology, but it's also really going to make things different. And I can remember. I don't know if you were ever in any of these conversations, but about 5 or 6 years before Phyllis Tickle died. So this would be about 10 or 11 years ago. Phyllis Tickle and Phyllis was wonderful. She loved talking about the future and all the wonderful books she wrote about what she called emergence. So this is about 5 or 6 years before she passed away. We were just talking. And she was telling me about, people were always trying to convince me how much the internet was going to change things. And Phyllis was one of those people. And she was telling me that she had just joined the church on Second Life. And she was explaining to me what that was, this virtual church in this virtual place on the internet. And that she had an avatar. I didn't even know what an avatar was, and it's like, and so she said there was an avatar priest. And she said, pretty soon this is all going to start raising questions. Can an avatar priest celebrate communion with virtual bread and wine and have it be effective?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember what I was going to bring up, because it's not just about technology. The place that I've really linked this into, I mean, there is tons of this, obviously, about technology and how people feel threatened. And I think that virtuality is actually reality. I mean, reality exists in multiple spheres, and it exists in ways that it's physicality of touching and being with one another in the same room and hugging and the fish sauce dribbling on your shirt.
Yeah.
But virtuality also exists in this other, or reality also exists in virtuality. And it's not just technology. Think about Stephen Hawking,
Hmm.
who spent his entire, basically, adult life in a wheelchair and functionally, physically, almost in a completely disabled state.
Yeah.
And so this is, it's not just about whether Zoom Eucharist works. You know, it's about, what about our disabled friends? What about people who can never leave their homes? Are you saying that those people Hawking had no access to love and compassion and justice and gratitude because he couldn't walk around? I'm literally angry that any church would come out and say right now, oh, this is less than.
Yeah.
This is less than. Stephen Hawking was less than. It means my friend Shannon Dingle is less than, who has to walk on braces. It means my friend Stephanie Tate, who can barely get on an airplane, is less than because her body is twisted from Lyme disease. It means that people who are blind, people who cannot hear, all those people are less than because they already live inside of virtual realities. That's the narrow-minded thinking that's going on right now.
Yeah.
Is that we already have virtual realities. And we also, we have citizens of virtual realities with extraordinary is another way of being. Dismissing how a significant part of the human population already experiences what is real. So you can tell that I'm pretty passionate about this, but I think that to say, you know, oh, yeah, no, tell that to Oxford University about all the theories of quantum physics that they can't be real because Stephen Hawking didn't take a pencil and move that pencil around a piece of paper and produce it in real life.
Yeah.
It's such narrow thing. Global storytelling platforms. We don't want to leave that to Walt Disney.
Yeah.
That should be the full people of God employing this great imagination that we have. This forever we had to communicate like this. Does that mean you would never celebrate the Eucharist again? Does it mean that you would never feel, you know, the warmth of our friendship because just because we could never get on an airplane and visit one another again?
Yeah.
There's something deeply limited and wrong with that.
Yeah. First of all, you need to write a book on this. Second of all, this opens up a whole nother conversation, but I just want to hear quickly what you would think about this, because one of the other things we've seen in this period, and again, not to minimize the pain and suffering of this moment, but this has also been a moment a couple of months ago, I was literally preaching sermons that kind of did say we need to get away from technology. We need more time connected with real people, and yet, as I think again about kind of the life that you and I get to live, traveling around a good bit, this is actually showing us, one, that we can actually still connect with people all around the world in a way that is zero carbon emissions, that will actually continue to help the healing that's already begun on planet Earth by humanity slowing down. All of the existential crises that we were facing before COVID-19 that were because we need it to be, or we believed we needed to be traveling around in these massive ways and using certain kind of fuels. If we get to live a little bit more of a virtual existence, it seems that that could in fact be a path towards grounding and healing and reconnecting with the world in some sense, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think what I think one of the things that it actually shows us that can happen is, see, I think sometimes people get afraid when they hear sort of zero-sum thinking. And so if people hear, us having this conversation and they heard what you just said, oh, well, maybe if we do all these things virtually, it's going to heal the earth. And then people go, well, wait a second, I like getting on airplanes and visiting my grandchildren in Arizona or what have you. And I don't want that to happen. And so then they say, well, so no, we're not going to go that way. When the reality of human cultures is that oftentimes we stumble into what I would call sort of mixed economies, especially at times of change. You hold on to some things from the older pattern and you employ lots of things from the newer one. And I think that not only, I think that there will be plenty of things that we hold on to from the older pattern, because we're going to miss them and we're going to want them to come back, like church in a building, for it to be able to hug people and gnaw on bread between the teeth and stuff like that. But things like, cars and airplanes, I think this shows us, how damaging they really are. And obviously it shows some smart people out there who are inventors, wow, we really do need to come up with an alternative fuel source really quickly. Because if we don't do that, airlines is going to go out of business because people will do everything virtually. So what are we going to do? United Airlines better think very fast how it can create a hyper clean fleet of airplanes. And, what kind of fuels could those be? I've always kind of wondered, why can't airplanes fly around the world? I know that people have been trying this in sort of prototype models on sunlight. You're way up there in the clouds. You're usually in the sunlight, except when you're in super terrible storms. I've always wondered, why can't fuel cells of some high sort of tech sort help to be fuel on a fuel source on those planes and cut down on fossil fuels? So anyway, I think that people who are way smarter than me about engineering are going to take this moment as a, wow, we really must do these things. And now that people have seen the results of what a fossil fuel minimized world looks like, we think they're going to like it. And so we better adjust if we want to, remain in business, remain profitable. I mean, people are people. They create fortunes off of all kinds of eco-innovation, as well as virtuality, as well as the redeployment of traditional sorts of forms of transportation and gathering on a more modest basis. And so that would be a mixed economy. Virtuality, radical innovation, and redeployment in a more sensible way. I can live with that, and that's actually kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so those are the ways that I like approaching problems like this, and I think that actually goes back to the whole thing of the Eucharist and to church, is that I think that some people are saying, oh, if we do virtual Eucharist, we'll never be in the building again. Oh my gosh, why would anybody want to pay a priest? Blah, 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 blah. And so they think that if you do the one thing, it's going to destroy how the old thing functions in a culture. But usually what happens is that bits and pieces of the older world do carry through crises, mix themselves up with new innovations, and then from that comes surprises of, human creativity, surprises of scientific breakthrough, surprises of all kinds of things. And so we don't live in a zero-sum kind of spiritual, intellectual, or social environment. And I think it's really important to just say, these things will change everything. These things must change everything. There are some really seriously big questions to think about here that are going to rock people's philosophical and theological worlds moving forward. But at the same time, we're also human beings. Yeah. And human beings make change in ways that fit within patterns and habits we already have. And so it's okay. I think that big change will come, but I also think that we'll have things that are familiar and beautiful and that we've always loved as well. And that it'll be a mixed sort of thing as we emerge from this.
Totally. The conversation took a completely different course than I thought it would, but it's been so inspiring and so helpful. So I'm really, really grateful to be able to think about and process this moment with you, and also feel a little inspired about what the future might look like. So thank you for taking time and for being who you are in the world in this moment.
Mostly I just am telling people, try to not be so afraid. Yeah. And I feel afraid too, and that's okay. Admit the fear. But the truth is, human beings have gotten through some pretty difficult things in the past, and surprising, joyful, and beautiful things have emerged out of it. So to mourn, feel the fear as you need to fear it, embrace the courage that is necessary for the day, and find gratitude in what is immediately around you.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Dr. Diana Butler Bass, thank you so much for joining us, watching. Thank you for taking time to be eavesdroppers in this conversation. I'm going to post links to your website on the feed underneath here, so people can find out about your latest book, which is Grateful, and then my favorite book of yours, which was Grounded. And yeah, it's so good to be able to connect with you and see you.
Yes, I keep telling people, stay grounded and grateful and you'll get through.
Yes. I love it. Well, thank you so much. And I hope you have a restful rest of your day.
Thank you. It's dinner time here in Washington, D.C. area. So I'm going to go feed my family. And it's great to see you, Brandon. I really do hope that those fish tacos are in the not too distant future for us.
Likewise, we need to get you back out here.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, good to see you and have a good night.
Good night.